If there is one casting call that changed what an entire series turned into, it's Michael C. Hall as Dexter Morgan, and you can see the proof in basically every episode. So today we're breaking down how a single audition rewrote TV history and launched the Dexter franchise into a class all its own. Say the pitch for this show out loud and listen to how bad it sounds. A weekly series about a man who stalks people, wraps them in plastic, straps them to a table, and cuts them up. He does it every episode. He is not the villain. He is the guy you're supposed to spend your Sunday night with. There's no version of that sentence that sounds like a hit, and it gets worse, because the show is based on a book where the character is colder and further away from you than what ended up on screen. On the page, he reads as something closer to a machine. That works fine for a novel because you can put a book down and come back when you feel like it. You cannot do that with a lead character on television. Whoever takes that part has to be somebody an audience will voluntarily sit with week after week for years, knowing exactly what he does. So the casting on this wasn't a normal casting decision. It was the whole business plan. Get it slightly wrong in either direction and the show dies before it even begins. And it nearly went another way. Jeff Lindsay, the guy who wrote the books, has said flat out that he was nervous, handing his character over to Michael C. Hall at first because he didn't think Hall could do it. Then he heard him speak as Dexter, and the doubt was gone. Lindsay's own words are that he was just wrong about it. Nobody has ever publicly said which line did the job, and honestly that part doesn't matter much, because the interesting thing isn't what happened in that room. The interesting thing is what showed up on screen afterward. And here's the thing that actually is on the record. Hall has been credited with turning Dexter into someone likable, charming, and funny, instead of the colder figure the material started as. The first season leans on the first book pretty heavily, and from season 2 onward, the show walks away from the novels and goes its own direction. What it walks toward is a warmer, more human character who ends up caring about friends and family, feeling love, and grieving people he loses.
Rita.
Read that again. The show did not just cast an actor who could play the part as written, it cast an actor who changed what the part was. That's a rare thing. Most of the time an actor serves a script and the script decides who the character is. Here it went the other way around. The actor found something in the main character that the source material didn't have, the writers saw it working, and they built the next several years around it. Hall ended up an executive producer on the show, which tells you how central he was to the machine and not just the front of it. So the casting didn't only fill a role, it picked what type of show this was going to be. The wild part is that the guy could easily have said no himself. Hall had just wrapped 5 years on 6 Feet Under, and by his own account, another television series was the last thing he wanted to sign up for. So the version of this where he reads the script, thinks about it, and passes is not some fan fantasy. That was a real possibility sitting on the table. And here's where the story gets bent out of shape online, so let's straighten it out. You'll see people say Jeremy Renner was up for Dexter and turned it down. That is not what happened. Michael Cuesta, who directed the pilot and produced the show, wanted Renner for Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, Dexter's own brother. And that conversation happened after the pilot had already been shot and picked up, which means it was never a fight over the lead role at all. Hall was already Dexter by then. Renner said no for 2 reasons, and both of them make sense. He had played Jeffrey Dahmer in a movie back in 2002, and he told Cuesta that he couldn't do another serial killer movie or television show. On top of that, he was already working on 28 Weeks Later, which he said was ultimately why he couldn't take the role. So the brother went to Christian Camargo instead, and Renner eventually went off to become Hawkeye. Which leaves you with something kind of amazing when you go looking for a credible list of actors who nearly played Dexter Morgan. There doesn't appear to be one. No verified public shortlist, no confirmed famous runner-up, no reliable story about who came second. The only documented near miss for the lead is Hall's own reluctance to commit to another series, alongside author Jeff Lindsay doubting the casting until he heard Hall speak in character. That is why you're on a very thin margin for a decision this big. So one decision in either direction, and this is a completely different show or no show at all, which makes it worth asking what he actually walked into when he said yes. Because the part he agreed to play wasn't one role. It was a pile of them, and every single one had to work inside the first hour. This wasn't one hard role. It was a stack of them, all running at the same time, all in the first episode, before the audience had a single reason to stay. You can watch them get loaded in during Season 1, Episode 1, the pilot, which is just called Dexter. He's a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro Homicide, so he's got a badge and coworkers and a desk and a boss. He's also a killer running a ritual, and he uses it on Mike Donovan in that same hour.
You say so.
On top of that, he's the narrator, talking straight to you the whole time, explaining his own thinking in a voice nobody in his life ever gets to hear. And there's a girlfriend, because Rita is already around. And his own narration admits that part of why she works for him is that what she went through with Paul means she isn't pushing him to get close. Then the show puts him at the ice truck killer's first big crime scene, and he isn't disgusted and he isn't scared. He's basically a fan at a museum admiring somebody else's work. That's a fifth thing on top of the other four. And he's a brother in that same hour too, backing Deborah up and pushing her toward the job she wants, which is the one relationship in his whole life he doesn't seem to be faking on purpose. There's a sixth job nobody puts on the list, and it might be the most important one of the bunch. He's funny. Not funny in a way the show winks at. Funny in the way he talks about ordinary human stuff, like a guy who got assigned to study an alien species and is filing a report. A big chunk of the fandom will tell you that's the single most valuable ingredient in the entire series, more than the scary parts, because without the jokes, the plastic and the slides, and the wall-to-wall narration get way too heavy somewhere around episode 4. The comedy is what makes it physically possible to sit there for an hour. Every one of those jobs is castable on its own. There are 100 actors who can play a quiet forensics nerd. There are 100 more who can play a scary guy. What kills you isn't any single one of them. It's the seams where they touch. Play him too cold and you're asking people to watch a lizard for 8 years. He becomes a machine, and machines stop being interesting after about 20 minutes. Play him too warm and something worse happens, because now the murders stop landing and the show turns into a joke it didn't mean to make.
That doesn't even make sense.
Your turn, Dexter.
And the narration makes both problems bigger, because you are locked inside his head with no escape hatch. There's no cutting away to a normal person for a break. Whatever he's giving you is the show. And it held on the very first try. The pilot pulled around 603,000 viewers on its first airing, and the same night Encore brought in another 443,000, which put the two runs together above 1 million and handed Showtime its best ratings in nearly 2 years. That is not a slow burn cult thing that quietly found its people by season 3. A serial killer showed up on television, and enough people wanted a second helping the same night to break a 2-year record for the network, which means the tone problem got solved in hour 1 before anybody had time to get attached. There was no grace period. A viewer in that first episode has no loyalty and no history and no reason to give anyone the benefit of the doubt, and the show is asking them to sit with a man who kills people and enjoys it. The writing can only put him in the room. Somebody else has to make you want to stay in it. That's what most people talk about. What almost nobody notices is that all 6 of those jobs were only half of what was happening in those scenes, and the other half is going on in the exact same shots. Here's the layer under the layer, and it's the thing that separates this from a normal great TV performance. You've got an actor playing a guy who is himself acting every hour of every day on purpose and doing it just slightly badly.
But I feel like I faked them all, and I faked them very well.
Everything Dexter does in public is a bit. The smile is a bit. He brings donuts to the station and does the small talk and plays the harmless, awkward coworker who's a beat slow on jokes. And every piece of that is built to make people stop looking at him. Fans catch it constantly on rewatches, and the tell they always land on is the voice. The way he talks to coworkers is not the way he sounds in narration. The posture is different too. The public version is stiffer and more careful, like a guy running a script in his head, which is exactly what he is. And the show is generous enough to hand you a referee for it. His name is James Dokes, and Dokes clocks him almost immediately. Not the killing, not at first, just the wrongness underneath. He looks at the same friendly forensics guy the entire building has decided is a little odd but fine, and he goes the other way with it. Everyone else reads the mask as awkwardness. Dokes reads it as a lie. He keeps pulling on that thread for 2 seasons. He follows him, he watches him, and in season 2, episode 9, Resistance is Futile, he finally gets all the way there and finds what he's been chasing.
That's right, motherfucker. It's over.
Then he ends up a prisoner in Dexter's own setup, which is where the code falls apart, because the rules say you only kill killers and Dokes doesn't qualify. Dokes is just right. Now look at how narrow the target is. If the mask were genuinely convincing, Dokes looks unhinged, and you spend 2 seasons watching a man harass an innocent coworker for no reason. And if the mask were obviously fake, the entire Miami Metro Homicide Department looks brain dead because they sit 6 feet from him every single day. So it has to be a bad performance that still works on almost everybody and fails on one specific person, and it has to keep failing on that one person consistently across dozens of hours without ever tipping into either problem. That is a very small window to live inside for 2 years, and it never wobbles. The show even sneaks in a moment where you get to see how he'd like to be seen. There's a stretch of the 2nd season where he pictures himself as a comic book hero in a mask, an Avenger cleaning up the city, and it plays as a joke for about 10 seconds before it stops being funny. Because that's not a random daydream, that's the sales pitch he's been running on himself the entire time, and putting it on screen in cape form is the show telling you it knows exactly how appealing that story is and exactly how false it is. Then season 3 runs the opposite experiment. Miguel Prado gets close enough to learn what he does and doesn't run screaming, which gives Dexter something he's never had, which is a friend he doesn't have to lie to.
Not Miguel Prado. Somehow he looks at me and he's proud.
For a while, it looks like the mask can come off with one person and life gets easier. It doesn't hold because Miguel takes the code and starts pointing it at people who simply annoy him, and Dexter has to put him on the table too. The rules only look like rules from the inside. Hand them to somebody else and they're just an excuse with a nice story attached. And the bill for all this arrives in a way that should sit badly with you. Dokes doesn't get to be the guy who was right. He ends up dead, and the evidence lands in a way that leaves him wearing the Bay Harbor butcher case, so the official record says the murders were his. The man who actually did them stands there, lets it happen, and goes back to work, so the disguise holds and somebody else pays for it. But there's a second thing being performed in this show that almost nobody thinks of as a performance at all, and it's the one thing the audience trusts completely, which is exactly what makes it the most powerful tool the whole series has. The narration tells you, over and over, that this is a man with nothing inside him. He says he doesn't understand love. He says the feelings other people have are things he watches and copies. And then the show spends 8 seasons quietly proving him wrong without ever letting him say it out loud. This is the single biggest thing the casting change, so it's worth being specific about it. The version of this character the show started from is a colder thing that stays at arm's length. The version that ended up on television is somebody who discovers that friends and family matter to him, who feels love and who grieves. That gap between the two is not a rewrite in a script, it's what a performance can add to a page when everything lines up. The first real crack shows up at the end of the first season, in season 1, episode 12, Born Free. Brian Moser is his biological brother. Same blood, same mother, same shipping container, same worst day of both their lives. He's the only other person alive who was actually there, and he shows up offering the one thing Dexter supposedly never had, which is somebody who knows exactly what he is and doesn't flinch.
We're blood brothers, through birth and death.
The price is Deborah, who isn't blood, who was assigned to him by Harry, who is by his own logic just part of the cover story. He picks Deborah, and he kills his brother to do it. That should settle the argument on its own, but the show pushes further because the next season opens with him unable to kill at all. He's rattled, he's off his game, he's got Dokes breathing down his neck, and the thing he's supposedly built to do just isn't available to him anymore. Someone with no feelings does not seize up after losing family. That's grief wearing a different name tag. Later that same season, the floor moves again because he finds out how Harry actually died. Harry killed himself after seeing what his own training had turned Dexter into. The man who wrote the rules, who framed the whole thing as a way to point a broken kid at bad people, got one clear look at the reality and couldn't live with what he'd built. And Harry doesn't leave when he dies. Dexter keeps having conversations with him for years. Imagine Harry gives advice, argues, criticizes, and second guesses him, and a lot of fans read that as him not being a memory at all. He's Dexter's conscience wearing his dad's face, which means every time Dexter thinks he's taking orders, he's the one giving them. And the way Harry's advice shifts over the years is just Dexter's own beliefs shifting. That is a lot of machinery to build around a guy who supposedly has nothing going on inside. People with no inner life do not argue with a ghost. The clearest tell is the stuff he never comments on. His narration is at its most confident when he's explaining his own emptiness, and it goes quiet exactly when Deborah or Rita or Harrison is in danger. Because in those moments, he isn't narrating, he's just reacting. Fans point at that constantly on rewatches. The words say one thing, and what the body does before the words catch up says the opposite, and the body is the part that isn't performing. This is the trick that makes the entire show work, and it's why people still argue about it years later. One camp says he genuinely grows into being human.
And when my darker urges start to swell, I can lean on him to become more human, more connected.
The other says there was never anything to grow into, that Harry handed a scared, traumatized kid a diagnosis, and the kid believed it and built a life on top of a wrong answer. There's a third read that the Dark Passenger isn't a separate thing living inside him at all. Just a story he learned to tell about his own trauma, because a story is easier to carry than the truth. The show never picks a side, and it can't, because picking one kills it. If he's definitely a monster, you stop caring, and if he's definitely a confused good guy, the murders become a technicality. The whole thing has to sit in the middle forever, and the only reason it can is that the voice saying one thing and the face doing another never quite line up. That balancing act stays fun as long as it's an argument. It stops being fun the second the show decides to test it on people who can actually get hurt, and it doesn't run that test once. It picks the people standing closest to him and does it right in front of you, and the first one it takes is the one he never saw coming. Rita starts out as a prop, and that's not me being harsh, that's how he describes her. She's the girlfriend who makes him look like a man with a normal life, and the reason she fits is that what she survived with Paul means she isn't asking him for much, she's cover. That's the entire pitch. Then the cover keeps growing, he proposes, they get married, there's Aster and Cody already, and then Harrison arrives. And now the fake life has 3 kids in it and a house and a schedule. By the time season 4 starts, the fake life is eating him alive. He's exhausted, stretched between a job and a marriage, and 3 children, and a hobby that requires him to vanish at night. And he is visibly bad at holding all of it together, which is exactly why he latches onto Arthur Mitchell.
And a dark passenger who's always got one hand on the steering wheel.
I can do it.
On paper, Arthur has solved the problem. Decades of killing, plus a wife, kids, and a church community, all running side by side without collapsing. That's not a target at first, that's a teacher. He wants to know how it's done. Then he gets inside that house for Thanksgiving, and what he finds isn't balance. It's a family living in fear of the man at the head of the table. There's no clever system. There's just a guy who terrorized everyone around him into playing along, and the calm surface is the result of that, not proof the thing can be done. Everybody in that town thinks Arthur is a good man, because he's got the church and the reputation, and he's the guy who shows up. The family man routine was never a life he built next to the murders. It was part of the murders, a costume with people living inside it. And it gets worse, because Arthur works out that Kyle Butler is really Dexter Morgan, and then traces him to Miami Metro and to his family. He never finds out that Dexter kills people, and he doesn't need to, because the thing that kept the 2 lives from touching was Dexter being nobody, and that's already gone before Dexter realizes it. It ends in season 4, episode 12, The Getaway. He kills Arthur, and he wins. And he drives home, feeling like the problem is finally solved. And then he walks in and finds Rita dead in the bathtub, with Harrison sitting on the floor in her blood. That's the same image as his own first memory. A small child sitting in a pool of his mother's blood is the exact thing that happened to Dexter as a kid. The thing Harry built the entire code around. He didn't protect his family from what he is. He handed his son the identical starting point. And the season after that is where the show cashes in everything the casting bought it. He can't hold it together. The grief comes out sideways, and people around him can tell something is badly wrong, even though nobody can name it, and he doesn't have language for it either, because his whole idea of himself says he shouldn't be feeling this at all. Then Lumen shows up, and she's the first person who sees what he does and stays anyway. Not because she's fooled, but because she wants something out of it. None of that lands if the guy playing it is the colder version from the page.
To me, she's someone I could share my life with. I will not let her die.
That season also ends on a moment people don't talk about enough. He and Lumen finish the job on Jordan Chase, and Deborah is right there, close enough to see 2 figures behind a sheet of plastic, and she lets them walk. She doesn't know it's him. She just decides these particular vigilantes have earned a pass. A homicide detective stands feet from her brother's kill room and looks the other way on purpose. Hold on to that, because she is going to make that same call again later with a lot more information, and the second time, it takes everything from her. Rita never knew the truth, and that's the only mercy anywhere in this story. There is one person left who knows him better than anybody alive, who has spent her whole career standing on the opposite side of what he does, and the show has been saving her the entire time. Deborah Morgan is in all 96 episodes of the original show. Every single one. There's no version of this story where she's a side character, because she's the test the whole thing gets run through. The show sets that up slowly. She's a cop, and she's loud and impulsive and says whatever pops into her head, which makes her the exact opposite of the man she trusts most in the world. She loses years of her life to men connected to him without ever knowing it, starting with Brian, who dated her and then took her and offered her up as a gift. Then in Season 6, Episode 12, This is the Way the World Ends, she walks into a church and sees it. She watches her brother kill Travis Marshall with the plastic and the table and the whole ritual.
This is the way the world ends.
She isn't the first person outside his head to get a look at that, since Dokes and Miguel and Lumen all arrived there in their own ways. But she's the first one who is his family and a homicide lieutenant at the same time, and that combination is the version he could never survive. He tries to sell it as a one-off after that. That lasts about an episode because in Season 7, Episode 1, Are You? She finds the knives and the blood slides and asks him flat out if he's a serial killer, and he says yes. Years of hiding, and it comes down to a one-word answer in a room with his sister. What she does next is what people underrate. She doesn't turn him in and she doesn't run. She tries to manage him, like watching him closely enough could hold the whole thing still. Then Ray Speltzer's confession gets thrown out on a technicality and he strolls out of the building, and Dexter goes and kills him. And Deborah is left sitting with how relieved she feels about it. Her way let a murderer walk, his way ended it, and she can't pretend she's sorry. From there, it slides. Lagerta gets close enough to corner them both, and Deborah is standing there with a gun and two options, and she shoots Lagerta. The cop shoots the cop to protect the killer.
Put him down!
Her collapse over that body was reportedly not fully scripted, which is a strange detail to know, because it means part of what you're watching wasn't planned by anyone. She never comes back from it. Season 8 has her out of Miami Metro, drinking, using, aiming all of it at him, because he's the only available target and also the one person she can't give up. The show even brings in Dr. Vogel to try to patch them back together, like the damage is a relationship problem you can talk out. Then, in Season 8, Episode 12, Remember the Monsters, Deborah gets shot and the damage doesn't heal, and he's the one who turns off the machines and takes her out to see himself, and then walks away from the clean life with Hannah and Harrison he was 2 days from having. That is what the casting bought. 6 jobs in the pilot so you'd follow him long enough to care, a mask good enough that Dokes could be right and nobody would listen, a narrator confident enough to lie to you for 8 years, a man capable of grief so the deaths of Rita and Deborah actually cost something. Hall won a Golden Globe for the role and pulled in multiple Emmy nominations along the way, which is about as close as this kind of tightrope walk ever gets to being officially graded. And then the franchise proves the point in the least subtle way possible. He leaves, and years later, he turns up in a small town in the snow, calling himself Jim Lindsay, still the same man underneath.
And I took it as a sign that I could start over.
Then the prequel comes along and hands the role to a completely different actor, a younger Dexter with a different face in a different decade, and Michael C. Hall is still the voice in your ear for all 10 episodes of it. They recast the body and kept the voice, because at some point the voice became the character. And now he's back on screen again in the newest continuation, still going. They could put somebody else's face on him, and it still wasn't a different Dexter. There's no other job on television where that's the outcome. And the reason people keep telling stories about one audition is that they can feel how close it came to being a completely different show. Nobody has a tape of what happened in that room. All anybody has is everything that came after it. If you want more Dexter breakdowns like this, slash that subscribe button and check out the video on screen right now.